Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. This happened about a year ago when my wife and I moved into what we thought would be our dream home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. We were so excited to finally have a place where our 10-year-old daughter could play safely and we could start fresh. Boy, were we wrong about the quiet part. The house itself was perfect. 3 bedrooms, decent yard, good school district. The neighborhood looked like something out of a magazine with its manicured lawns and pristine driveways. Everyone seemed friendly when we moved in, waving from their porches and offering to help with boxes. That's when we met her. She lived directly across the street in a house that looked like it had never seen a speck of dirt. Perfect white shutters, roses that belonged in a gardening magazine, and a lawn so green it almost looked fake. She came over on our second day with a casserole dish and the biggest fake smile I'd ever seen. She introduced herself cheerfully and welcomed us to the neighborhood, but then handed me what she called a helpful guide she'd put together for new residents. This wasn't some official HOA document. This was a typed-up list of her personal rules for the neighborhood. Things like what color our window blinds should be when trash cans needed to be hidden from view, and even a list of approved landscaping companies. My wife and I exchanged glances as we read through this bizarre document, but we tried to be polite. We thanked her for the casserole and told her we'd look over her suggestions. She seemed pleased and reminded us that maintaining property values was everyone's responsibility before heading back across the street. We should have seen the red flags right then, but we just laughed it off as an overly enthusiastic neighbor who took pride in her community. We had no idea what we were dealing with. Everything started going downhill about a month after we moved in. My wife and I are both pretty environmentally conscious, and we'd been planning to convert part of our front lawn into a native wildflower meadow. We'd researched it extensively and knew it would help support local pollinators like bees and butterflies. The environmental benefits were clear, and honestly, we were excited about doing something positive for the ecosystem. Before starting any work, I made sure to check with everyone who mattered. I called the city planning office and confirmed that native landscaping was not only allowed but actually encouraged. I contacted our HOA and got written approval for the project. I even checked local ordinances to make sure we weren't violating any height restrictions or setback requirements. Everything was completely legal and above board. The project began on a Saturday morning. We hired a landscaping crew to remove about a quarter of our front lawn and prepare the soil for native wildflower seeds. The plan was to create a beautiful natural area that would bloom throughout the growing season and provide habitat for beneficial insects. I was inside getting the crew some water when my wife came rushing in with a panicked look on her face. She told me our neighbor was outside yelling at the workers and demanding they stop immediately. I hurried outside to find her standing in our driveway, hands on her hips, lecturing our landscaping crew about property values and neighborhood standards. When she saw me, she marched over with that same fake smile from the day we moved in. She told me sweetly that she was sure there must be some misunderstanding because surely we wouldn't be planting weeds in our front yard. I explained politely that we were creating a native wildflower meadow to support local wildlife and showed her the approved plans we'd gotten from the HOA. Her expression changed instantly. The fake smile disappeared, and she told me bluntly that this wasn't some backwoods farm and that our weeds would attract vermin and destroy everyone's property values. I tried to explain the environmental benefits, but she cut me off and said we'd be hearing from the HOA about this before storming back to her house. That was the beginning of months of pure hell. At first, her harassment was subtle. She started posting vague complaints in our neighborhood Facebook group about irresponsible new neighbors and unsightly weed patches. She never mentioned us by name, but it was obvious who she was talking about. Whenever I was outside working in the yard, she'd have loud phone conversations on her porch about how some people had no respect for their neighbors. When the passive-aggressive approach didn't work, she escalated to filing official complaints. She submitted a formal grievance to our HOA claiming our wildflower meadow violated community standards. The HOA sent someone out to investigate, reviewed our pre-approved plans, and dismissed her complaint immediately. This only made her angrier. She then started calling city code enforcement on a weekly basis. Every Monday, like clockwork, she'd file a new complaint with a rotating list of accusations. One week, our native grasses were supposedly too tall and creating a fire hazard. The next week, she claimed our wildflowers were attracting rats. Another time, she reported us for allegedly running an illegal farming operation in a residential zone. Each complaint resulted in a city official showing up at our door, usually apologizing for having to investigate obviously frivolous claims. They'd inspect our property, find no violations, and leave after filling out their required paperwork. It was incredibly stressful having official city vehicles in our driveway multiple times per month and knowing our neighbors were watching and wondering what we'd done wrong. The constant scrutiny was taking a toll on our whole family. My daughter started asking why the lady across the street was always angry at us. My wife was getting anxious every time someone knocked on our door, worried it would be another inspector. I was losing sleep thinking about what crazy accusation would come next, but the worst was yet to come. About 3 months into this nightmare, I noticed that patches of our wildflower meadow were dying off for no apparent reason. Healthy plants that had been thriving suddenly turned brown and withered. At first, I thought it might be some kind of disease, but the pattern was too random and targeted. That's when I decided to install security cameras around our property. The camera footage revealed exactly what I suspected. She was sneaking over to our house in the middle of the night, wearing dark clothes and carrying a spray bottle. The video clearly showed her systematically poisoning our plants with what looked like herbicide and salt. I was furious, but I knew I needed more evidence before confronting her. I let the cameras run for another week and caught her 3 more times damaging our property under cover of darkness. Each time she was careful to target different areas so the damage would look natural. The harassment didn't stop with property damage. She started taking photos and videos of our family whenever we were in our front yard. If my daughter was playing outside, she'd stand at her window with her phone, obviously recording. When we'd have friends over for barbecues in our backyard, she'd position herself where she could film through our fence gaps. It was beyond creepy and started affecting my daughter's sense of safety in her own home. She'd ask to play in the backyard instead of the front yard because she didn't want the mean lady watching her. A 10-year-old shouldn't have to feel that way in her own neighborhood. I tried reasoning with her one more time. I walked across the street and knocked on her door, hoping we could work things out like adults. I brought printouts of the security footage showing her damaging our property and calmly explained that her behavior was not only illegal but was frightening my child. She denied everything, claimed the footage was fake, and accused me of harassment for coming to her door. She told me that if I really cared about my daughter, I'd remove the eyesore from our front yard and plant a proper lawn like responsible homeowners. The conversation ended with her threatening to call the police if I ever set foot on her property again. That's when I realized she was completely unreasonable and that appealing to her better nature was pointless, but I still hoped things would calm down over time. I was wrong. The final straw came on a Tuesday afternoon when my daughter was playing with sidewalk chalk near the edge of our yard. I was inside working from home when I heard shouting from outside. I looked out the window to see our neighbor standing in the middle of the street screaming at my 10-year-old daughter. I couldn't hear everything she was saying, but I caught enough to understand she was accusing my daughter of planning to damage her prize-winning rose bushes. She called my child a poorly raised brat and threatened to have her arrested if she ever came near her property. My daughter ran inside crying and terrified, asking what she'd done wrong and why the lady hated her so much. Seeing my child in tears because of this woman's unhinged behavior was the moment everything changed for me. I'd been patient, I'd been reasonable, I'd tried to take the high road and handle things through proper channels, but attacking my child was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The gloves were officially off. I work as a data analyst, so documentation and organization are second nature to me. Instead of storming across the street and escalating things emotionally, I decided to approach this systematically and destroy her using her own tactics against her. I spent the next week compiling what I called the documentation project. I gathered every piece of evidence from the past 4 months of harassment. I created a detailed timeline with timestamps for every incident. I collected high-definition video footage of her poisoning our plants and taking unauthorized photos of our family. I screenshot every passive-aggressive Facebook post she'd made about us. I documented all 27 code enforcement calls she'd filed, including statements from the tired city officials who'd been forced to repeatedly investigate her bogus complaints. But that was just the beginning. I also did a deep dive into the very city codes and HOA bylaws that she claimed to worship. I spent hours reading through municipal ordinances looking for rules that were technically on the books but commonly ignored. I was looking for ways to give her a taste of her own medicine using completely legal means. That's when I found some interesting loopholes. The city allowed lawn ornaments with no specific size restrictions. The HOA permitted flagpoles up to 20 feet tall. There were no rules against temporary art installations on private property. My plan started forming. The next morning, she woke up to quite a sight. I'd purchased 75 bright pink plastic flamingos and arranged them in elaborate patterns across our entire front lawn. They were tacky, gaudy, and absolutely impossible to ignore, but they were completely within the rules according to every bylaw I could find. I also commissioned a local artist friend to create what we officially called a modern art flagpole sculpture. It was an abstract metal structure that technically functioned as a flagpole but looked like something from a scrapyard. From it, we flew a custom flag featuring a giant smiling cartoon bumblebee surrounded by wildflowers. The reaction was immediate and explosive. She came storming across the street before I'd even finished my morning coffee, demanding I remove what she called my carnival trash immediately. I calmly explained that everything was completely legal according to the same code she'd been using to harass us for months. When she threatened to call the HOA, I handed her printed copies of the relevant bylaws with the applicable sections highlighted. She spent the rest of the day making phone calls to anyone who would listen, but every official she contacted confirmed that our decorations, while unconventional, violated no rules or regulations. That evening, she posted a long, angry rant in the neighborhood Facebook group about our flamingo display and how it was ruining the character of the neighborhood. This was exactly what I'd been waiting for. I responded with a calm, factual comment that laid out everything that had been happening. I wrote that while we understood our lawn decor wasn't to everyone's taste, we'd decided to express ourselves legally after months of targeted harassment that included property damage and an adult screaming at our 10-year-old daughter. I included links to selected security camera footage showing her poisoning our garden at night. The response from our neighbors was swift and decisive. People who had been politely neutral suddenly started commenting with their own stories about her controlling behavior and complaints about properties that weren't even visible from her house. Several neighbors admitted they'd been afraid to do anything with their own yards because they knew she'd complain. The tide of public opinion had completely turned against her. But I wasn't done yet. Remember all that research I'd done into city codes? Well, it turned out that while she'd been obsessing over our completely legal wildflower meadow, her own property had several violations that she'd been getting away with for years. Update: 6 months later, the full aftermath and some unexpected twists. I got a lot of requests for updates on this story, so I figured I'd share what's happened since my original post. Some of you might find this interesting, and there were a few developments I never saw coming. First, the good news. Life has been absolutely peaceful since she moved out. Our new neighbors are fantastic. The husband is a retired teacher, and the wife works as a nurse. Their twin boys are the same age as our daughter, and they've become great friends. The kids spend hours in our wildflower meadow catching butterflies and learning about different plants. The new neighbors were actually curious about why the previous owner had left so suddenly, so we gave them the basic story. They were shocked and told us they'd specifically chosen our neighborhood because they loved seeing a house that prioritized environmental sustainability over sterile lawn perfection. It turns out there are more people who appreciate natural landscaping than I realized. But here's where things get interesting. About 3 months after she moved out, I got a call from someone I never expected to hear from again. Remember the city code enforcement officer who had to keep investigating her frivolous complaints? Well, he reached out to thank me for documenting everything so thoroughly. Apparently, our situation had become a case study in their department for dealing with harassment through false reporting. He told me that she had actually been filing similar complaints against multiple residents across the city for years, not just us. The pattern of behavior we documented helped them identify and dismiss dozens of other bogus complaints she'd made against innocent homeowners. Even more surprising, the city decided to implement new policies because of our case. They now require a small fee for code enforcement complaints after the first 2 per year, specifically to discourage people from weaponizing the system for personal vendettas. The officer joked that they should name it after our former neighbor, but they went with something more professional. We also found out why she was so obsessed with controlling the neighborhood. The new family mentioned that when they were touring the house, the realtor let slip some information about the previous owner. Apparently, she had been running an unlicensed home staging business and was using our neighborhood as a showcase for potential clients. She'd take before and after photos of houses she'd staged and use the pristine neighborhood as a selling point. Our wildflower meadow was literally ruining her business model because it didn't fit the artificial perfection she was trying to sell. It explains why she was so desperate to force us to conform, and why she escalated things so dramatically when we refused to back down. The realtor also mentioned that she'd had complaints from several previous buyers about her aggressive behavior and controlling attitude toward neighbors. Apparently, we weren't her first victims, just the first ones to fight back effectively. There's been an unexpected positive outcome from all this drama too. Our wildflower meadow has inspired several other neighbors to try native landscaping projects of their own. We now have 3 other houses on our street with some form of pollinator-friendly gardening, and the whole neighborhood has more butterflies and birds than ever before. The Homeowners Association actually featured our meadow in their newsletter as an example of environmentally responsible landscaping. They've started encouraging native plant gardens and even organized a neighborhood workshop on sustainable yard care. It's amazing how much positive change can come from one family refusing to be bullied. My daughter has turned into quite the little environmentalist through all this. She gives tours of our wildflower meadow to her friends and can identify about 15 different butterfly species. She's even started a nature club at school that focuses on creating pollinator habitats. I'm incredibly proud of how she turned a negative experience into something positive. One funny thing that came out of this whole situation was the flamingo incident. After we removed them, several neighbors asked if they could buy some for their own yards. Apparently, a few people had actually enjoyed the cheerful pink birds and thought they added some whimsy to the neighborhood. We ended up donating most of them to a local elementary school that used them for a fundraising auction. The art sculpture flagpole found a permanent home at a community garden across town. The artist friend who created it said it was perfect for their space, and it's still flying the bumblebee flag we commissioned. Sometimes I drive by just to see it and remember how satisfying it was to beat her at her own game. We've also become somewhat famous in our local environmental community. The story of our wildflower meadow victory has been shared in several gardening groups and sustainability forums. We've had people from as far as 3 towns over come to see our meadow and ask for advice on dealing with resistant neighbors or HOA issues. I've started keeping a file of resources for people facing similar harassment over environmental landscaping choices. It includes templates for getting proper approvals, documentation strategies, and legal resources for fighting back against bullying neighbors. If our experience can help other families protect their right to make sustainable choices, then something good came out of all that stress and frustration. The security cameras we installed have stayed up, but now they mainly capture footage of kids playing, neighbors chatting over the fence, and wildlife enjoying our meadow. It's a much more peaceful kind of surveillance than documenting property damage and harassment. One last interesting development came about 2 months ago. We got a letter forwarded from our old neighbor's new address. It was actually an apology letter, though not a very convincing one. She claimed she'd been under a lot of stress from her business and family issues and that she'd handled the situation poorly. She asked us to consider removing any negative reviews or comments we might have posted about her online. The thing is, we never posted any reviews or comments about her anywhere. The only place we shared our story was in response to her public Facebook rants, and all we did was state facts with evidence. It makes me wonder if she's having similar problems with new neighbors and is trying to clean up her online reputation. We didn't respond to the letter. Some bridges are burned beyond repair, and we have no interest in relitigating the past. We're too busy enjoying our peaceful present and planning for an even better future. Speaking of the future, we're considering expanding our native landscaping to the backyard next spring. We want to create a full habitat garden with native shrubs and trees in addition to the wildflowers. Our new neighbors are so enthusiastic about the project that they're thinking about coordinating their own backyard plantings to create a wildlife corridor between our properties. The whole experience taught our family that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. We could have given in to her demands and planted a boring grass lawn to avoid conflict. Instead, we chose to fight for our values and our rights, and we created something beautiful that benefits our entire community. Our daughter still talks about the importance of not letting bullies win, whether they're kids at school or adults who think they can control other people's choices. She learned that sometimes you have to be smart and strategic rather than just getting angry, and that the best revenge is living your values and creating something positive. Looking back, I'm grateful for how everything turned out. We have a beautiful, thriving ecosystem in our front yard. We've made wonderful new friends. We've inspired positive changes in our neighborhood and beyond. And we've proven that ordinary families can fight back against bullying and harassment when they're organized, persistent, and committed to doing what's right. The best part is knowing that our story has a completely happy ending. She's gone, we're thriving, and our little wildflower meadow continues to bloom bigger and more beautiful each year. Sometimes the good guys really do win, especially when they fight smart instead of fighting angry. That's my final update on this saga. Thanks to everyone who followed the story and offered support and advice. It really meant a lot during some very stressful months. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go water our meadow and count this year's monarch butterflies with my daughter. The next one is a pro-revenge story. The cast. Names have been changed to protect identities. Carrie, my friend and the heroine of the story. Sharon, the secretary with loose morals. Roger, it manager and villain of the story. Ivan, the CEO and company owner, also owner of 3 or so other small companies, one of which was in the same office block. Olivia, Roger's wife. Carrie works for a small IT company as a programmer and web designer, along with about 8 others, including her manager and her newest colleague, Sharon, the secretary. Roger is a womanizing rogue who makes frequent, moderately offensive comments about women, customers, and staff, like he has no brain-mouth filter. Sharon is, as Carrie puts it, an upwardly mobile skank who will literally, yes, actually, blow the boss if he buys her new shoes, so boner for a bonus, and she has had a bonus, just not for productivity. Her decorative fence was exactly 2 inches taller than the maximum height allowed in our zone. Her prize-winning roses had grown over the property line and were encroaching on the public sidewalk. Most importantly, she had an unpermitted security floodlight on her garage that was bright enough to illuminate our bedroom window at night, violating the city's light pollution ordinance. I filed detailed, meticulously documented complaints for each violation, citing exact code sections and providing photographic evidence with precise measurements. I was every bit as thorough and persistent as she had been with her frivolous complaints against us. Within 2 weeks, she started receiving official violation notices from the city. She was ordered to lower her fence, trim back her roses, and remove or modify her floodlight. Each violation came with fines that would double if not corrected within the specified time frame. The social consequences were even more severe than the official ones. She went from being the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog to being a social pariah almost overnight. Her controlling behavior and months of harassment were now public knowledge, and people started avoiding her completely. She attempted one final confrontation about a week later. She came marching across the street while I was watering our wildflower meadow, which had recovered beautifully despite her sabotage attempts. She started screaming about how I was a vindictive person who was trying to ruin her life and force her out of the neighborhood. I didn't engage with her rant at all. I simply pulled out my phone, started recording, and calmly told her that every word she was saying was being documented for the restraining order my lawyer was preparing. The mention of legal action seemed to snap her back to reality, and she retreated to her house without another word. 2 months later, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. The house sold quickly to a lovely family with twin boys who love playing in our wildflower meadow and watching the butterflies. They think our native landscaping is beautiful and have asked for advice on creating their own pollinator garden. We removed the flamingos and art sculpture after she moved out. They'd served their purpose, and honestly, we were ready to get back to normal too. Our wildflower meadow is now in its 2nd year and more beautiful than we ever imagined. It's teeming with bees, butterflies, and other beneficial insects throughout the growing season. My daughter plays freely in our front yard again without fear of being watched or yelled at. My wife doesn't get anxious when official vehicles drive down our street. I sleep peacefully knowing that our family can enjoy our home without constant harassment. Looking back on the whole experience, I realize that bullies often rely on people being too polite or too tired to fight back effectively. She counted on us being intimidated by her complaints and eventually giving in to her demands just to make the harassment stop. But when someone targets your family's peace and happiness, sometimes you have to be willing to play by their rules and beat them at their own game. I never wanted a war with our neighbor, but when she forced one on us, I made sure to fight it with intelligence, documentation, and an unshakable adherence to the very laws she tried to weaponize against us. The most satisfying part wasn't just winning, though. It was watching the entire neighborhood dynamic change for the better. People are more relaxed now, more willing to make creative choices with their properties, and more supportive of each other. Several neighbors have thanked us for standing up to her controlling behavior that had been affecting everyone. I learned that sometimes the most effective way to deal with a bully isn't to sink to their level, but to rise above it with careful planning and legitimate tactics. We didn't just survive her harassment campaign, we completely dismantled it and restored peace to our entire neighborhood. Our daughter learned an important lesson too about standing up for what's right and not backing down when bullies try to intimidate you. She's proud of our wildflower meadow now and loves explaining to visitors why native plants are important for the environment. The whole experience taught me that when someone tries to make your life miserable, the best revenge is living well and fighting back with intelligence rather than emotion. We came out on top not because we were mean or vindictive, but because we were smart, patient, and absolutely committed to protecting our family's right to peace in our own home. Sometimes justice takes time, but when it finally comes, it's sweeter than you ever imagined. The first Carrie knew about Sharon's behavior was late one Saturday afternoon, when everyone had left for the weekend except Carrie as she had a project. She was beavering away at her desk in a nearly silent office when she heard a squeal. She immediately got up to investigate and found her boss's door ajar. She heard another squeal and walked in. Finding Sharon bent over the desk with her skirt hitched up above her hips, her boss, trousers round his ankles, balls deep behind her. Yes, this is artistic license, but that's how she described it. Roger's expression indicated fury and embarrassment, and he sounded to be mid-nut. Sharon had an expression like the cat that had the cream, with no pun intended. She certainly didn't seem bothered about being caught. Roger recovers his composure, puts his trousers back on, and called Carrie back into the room. She hadn't stopped to watch, and threatened to fire her if she let slip what she'd seen. The instruction was, tell nobody. Act like it never happened. It's important at this point to mention that this was at the height of COVID, and they were looking at the possibility of reducing staff numbers, something which fortunately never happened. But at the time of this story, nobody was sure. Carrie kept quiet. Ooh, that's nice alliteration. Roger would occasionally remember that she knew what he was up to and would give her dirty looks. But little more was said. Sharon and Roger were still having regular sex at work, and Sharon was getting the bonuses that the team should have received. She was also receiving boners, but nobody would have felt jealous had they known. One Saturday, about 6 months after the initial shock discovery, an opportunity for revenge and technically malicious compliance presented itself. Olivia, Roger's wife, popped in. The staff were still there and the office was busy and a bit noisy. Roger had excused himself to his office with Sharon early as he knew his wife would be in later to meet him and wanted to get his end away before she arrived. She was early. Olivia was standing at Sharon's desk. Sharon was the secretary after all, and Carrie saw an opportunity. She offered to help in the absence of the secretary, and Olivia asked to see Roger. Carrie obliged. The next bit is a little vague, as Carrie skipped some details. But apparently she knows how to get past the lock on his office door, like the door frame is a little too big, and that's the vague bit. Carrie was able to open the door as if it wasn't locked and hold it open for Olivia, who walked in to see her husband screwing the secretary from behind. Olivia's eruption was one of incandescent fury, which caused Roger's excuses to melt away. He was trying to explain that it wasn't what it looked like while pulling his trousers up. Sharon, meanwhile, had tried to discreetly leave, but Olivia had turned her full wrath on Sharon's direction, so Sharon excused herself by asking Roger why he'd never told her he was married. He had actually told her, but the ruse worked. Roger stared daggers at Carrie, but she told him that she'd done as he asked. She had never told anyone, and had acted as if it had never happened, just as he'd demanded. Olivia asked what she meant, and she explained in painful detail what had been going on. With Olivia screaming blue murder at Roger, nobody heard the big boss, Ivan, arrive. He must have heard the ruckus and come to investigate. At this point, he'd heard enough from outside the office, and Carrie was asked to leave. Roger doesn't work there anymore, and neither does Sharon. Sharon was dismissed for gross misconduct, and Roger is awaiting a court date. Something about fraud or embezzlement or something. Details are sketchy here. No information about his marriage. Sorry. Carrie is still at the company, but now works as an assistant manager to a newly appointed female manager. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I'm a nurse at an always busy hospital. As usual, we have tons of rules and protocols to follow. One of the rules our hospital is extremely strict about is patient privacy, which is great in theory, except sometimes the way they enforce it becomes a little over-scrupulous. There was this one time I was working the night shift when a senior doctor comes in to check on a patient who just had surgery done. Now, we had a very clear protocol for allowing visitors the patient must give their consent in writing, and the visitor had to be listed in the system beforehand, with their ID checked and logged at the front desk. Easy enough, right? Well, this one time, the patient's sister arrived to visit completely legit. The family were aware, and she had an ID to prove she was who she said she was. But the issue was, she didn't technically meet the protocol because she hadn't signed any papers yet, plus it was the night shift, and so HR was closed. As a result, getting the paperwork was a bit of a hassle. The doctor was frustrated, but I kept repeating the rules. Sorry, I can't allow you to see the patient until the paperwork is in order. He went ballistic when I wouldn't bulge. I just kept pointing to the sign on the wall that said, "No exceptions to patient privacy rules." He muttered something under his breath about common sense, but I wasn't about to risk losing my job over a technicality, not after all I went through to get it. By now, the patient's sister is in tears, which I wasn't happy about, but I told her, "I'm just following the rules. I promise I'll get you in as soon as the paperwork clears." Eventually, the doctor, in a moment of frustration, took matters into his own hands, grabs the chart, scribbles down a note authorizing the visit, and hands it over to me. I don't know if it was the fact that he's a doctor or the fact that he was basically forcing me into a corner, but I took the note, followed through, and let the sister in. Later that night, HR called me to double-check on a different matter, and somehow the whole visitor approval issue came up. I got an email the next morning which was a reminder to always follow protocol strictly, but with a hilarious extra line at the end, unless it's signed off by a doctor. So basically, I learned that sometimes the rules are a bit flexible, especially when your superiors are the ones bending them. I guess my obdurate stance turned out to be the catalyst for HR revising their policy. They haven't updated the signage yet, though, so I'm still getting weird looks from the night shift staff. The next one is an entitled people story. I read a story that reminded me of something that happened to my mom many years ago that I thought I would share. I grew up in a smaller city back in the 70s and 80s. Our small city was the county seat, so the county courthouse sat in the middle of the downtown square. At the time, there were parking meters around the downtown area. A penny in the meter got you like 10 minutes parking, a nickel got you 55 minutes, and a dime got you 2 hours. And you had to move your vehicle after 2 hours, so if you were at the courthouse, you couldn't take up a parking spot all day. I had gone shopping with my mom, and she had put money in the meter before we went in the store, but when we came out, there was a parking ticket on her car. But the meter still had several minutes of time left on it. Mom saw the meter maid coming down the block and sent me to go get her. She asked why she got a ticket when she still had time on her meter. At first, the meter maid thought Mom was just trying to get out of the ticket, but then she looked closely at the ticket, and it was not for my mom's car. The ticket had the make, model, and tag number on it, and it didn't match my mom's car. It matched the car parked 2 spots down. The meter maid called her supervisor, and while the supervisor was there, the woman who got the ticket on her car came out and got in her car. She had come out to add money to her meter, but she already had let her meter expire and had a ticket, so she put money in her meter and moved the ticket down to another car. She thought whoever would just go ahead and pay the ticket because their meter would probably expire before they got back. The supervisor wrote her a second ticket for a fine that was something like 5x the cost of the parking ticket, and told her that she couldn't just put her parking ticket on another car because the ticket was linked to her car tag and penalties and interest would be added when she went to renew her tag. I wondered if she had gotten away with this before because someone's meter had expired and so they just paid the ticket without looking too closely at it first. There were boxes on every block where you could pay parking tickets. I don't remember how much parking tickets were back then, but I know it wasn't a huge amount. Anyway, thank you for watching.